So, hello everyone, I hope you're going well. So, today I will actually answer the question from, let me see, Dr. Happy. So, the question was good video, very educational. I would like to see a video converting winning positions as you mentioned. And it is exactly what I would do. But also, I want to thank you very much for the 400 subscribers. It's actually pretty nice. I didn't think that we will actually reach that. I also want to thank you for, the amount of views on my last video. You know, it's just motivating me to make more videos. So now let's just start. I will take two games from Gukesh today, and we will see how to win winning positions. When it's a strategical position, and then when it's a tactical position. That way, you will be able to just see how 2700 rated grandmasters manage to actually convert positions easily. I'm showing you these games. Now the idea is just that you sit down, you learn, and the next time when you will play your next chess game, you will also be able to do that. So the game started with d4. Gukesh plays with the white pieces against Ra1. Oh, I'm sorry, d4, d5, knight f3, knight f6, and bishop f4, the London system. If you want to learn more about the London system, the link is, of course, in the description. You have access to my book. So, c5, striking immediately in the center. So, against c5, you should just play e3 and basically just solidify, your pawn structure in the center. There is no reason, to be scared of anything. It's an easy position, so, just do that. C takes d4, which is a very funny move. You should be able to go, you are able to go e6 or knight c6, so just do that. Bring your pieces out. Because now just taking, it's just giving, it's just simplifying the position. Now white already has 4 pawns against 3 or 3 against 2, which means that white either have a majority attack on the queen side, or black will manage to do something, but because all the pieces are still there, the minority attack isn't that good for black. So knight c6, knight bd2, just preparing, to bring the pieces out and castle, bishop f5, and now c3, which makes sense. Now bishop d3 doesn't make any more sense, and bishop e2 is slightly passive eventually. Now we prefer to keep the bishop there. So Gukesh went c3, and now at some point he will actually probably even go bishop b5, but I won't say anything. e6, queen b3, striking the pawn on b7 now that the bishop is on f5 and isn't protecting the pawn on b7, queen c8. Now if you go queen b6, it's not that good because you're not in time to play b5 and attack the pawn structure, and the bishop is pretty good there. And this is of course horrible. For example, something like that I think just wins the pawn immediately. But okay. Queen c8, and now bishop b5, there is a pin, and basically Gukesh wants to go knight e5. So it doesn't mean that white is winning already, but the London system is such an easy opening, you basically get positions like that all the time. So bishop e7, and now knight e5. The structure will be destroyed, and it will give white an edge. Not an advantage yet, but at least an edge. So castles, bishop e6, pawn takes e6, and now queen a4, putting pressure on that pawn. So there is only one way to not lose the pawn. It's to go c5. So black executes and go c5. Castles, because it's always important to castle. And now again, black will play a pawn move, which is bad. Just c takes d4. If you want to go, for example, rook d8, you have to trust something like that. And that's difficult. And I think that now the best continuation is probably to play b3, then rook c8, and now some pressure are arriving over there, and now white should take the bishop and just keep the tension, because every time white takes, black can just take back, and c3 is very weak. So that is not an option, or eventually it is, but I wouldn't recommend you to play that with white. So, or probably c4 in the end, but d4, nah, I don't know. I will have to analyze this position more deeply, and I don't think it's good. So c takes d4 is certainly not good. So d takes e4, and now white is slightly better because white is just more active. All pieces are basically perfect. The knight will either go on b3, c5, or on f3, supporting on e5. A rook, doesn't matter which one, will go on c1, then on c3, and double up on the c file. So white is just more active and eventually slightly better. Now, queen b7 makes some sense. Knight b3 stops the attack on the pawn on b2, and bishop c2, aggression. But it doesn't matter for Gukesh, who goes rook fc1, and now if you take on b3, white will just take back with the b pawn. Now there is an open c file for the rook. The a7 pawn is a target, and eventually we will go knight c6 or some tactics with some knight g6 you take and rook c7 and some problems over there. So basically a lot of moves are slowly but surely available for white. Probably it was still the best option, but okay, we can understand why he didn't go for it. He played rook f8, which makes a lot of sense. Now if knight c6, the bishop will go back to f8. And now h3. Why h3? Because taking there, um, you know, I'm sorry, because preparing to eventually attack there with something like knight c6 or knight c5 doesn't really work for the moment. If you go knight c5, I think there's just rook takes c5 defending the bishop, and if we do something like that, I think that the advantage is actually, not for white anymore. Now the rook is very active, b2 is a weakness, and if queen d2, probably bishop b4, some problems, knight e4, etc. So I don't know. I don't know. It's not a great position. So h3 was played, just waiting, and now black has to prove something. But still, it was eventually slightly slow. I think that in that position, knight b3 made sense, but probably even b3 was okay. I don't know actually. That's chess. So actually the game is still equal, but okay. Or probably knight c6, knight a5. Now that was probably the best choice, but okay. Ah no, it's right. If this queen c7. So rook fc1, rook f8, h3, and queen b4, preparing to trade the queens off. Gukesh executes, takes, and now bishop e3 because I think Gukesh wanted to go f4, but also Gukesh probably wanted to go knight c5, and if you take, I will take back with the d pawn, and I will have a protected pass pawn. So probably the best option was now to take on b3 and play this pretty equalized position, and probably black would have survived with some accurate play, but okay, nobody knows, because black played a5, trying to play a4, which now is slightly too aggressive. The knight is still on f6. I don't think it's good to attack like that. So Gukesh plays knight c5, and now if you take, I will take back with a d pawn. I have a pass pawn protected. I'm attacking the bishop, and once the bishop goes back, I can go b3 or a3 b4 or b3 a3 b4 to have two connected pass pawns. If you go a3 now, there's probably a4, stopping it. And if you go b3, that is to go a3 b4, there is no more a4 because you go b4, and now you have two protected pass pawns, and if someone attacks you, you go a3, and now you won power 3. So that is certainly not idea for black. It's not a good idea for black to allow that. So bishop f5 was played, and now a3. The bishop is still trapped, so takes, and now a4, which makes sense to stop the structure. And that is an inconvenience, but it's okay because white is now better thanks to the passed pawn and the very active bishop compared to the knight on f6, which is for the moment pretty passive. But who knows? Probably something will change. c6. Now the knight is very active on e5. It's defending the pawn on c6, and eventually this bishop will one day, support the pawn. For example, now there is no rook a7 stopping the pawn because the bishop is there, and eventually one day we will go c7, and we can imagine bishop a7, bishop b8, and the pawn will be protected forever. So knight e8, and now knight d7, a small tactical trap. When you're better strategically, you just have to play moves which go forward. It doesn't mean that you have to make moves that only goes geometry speaking, you know, towards black's king, but it means that you have to make moves that are basically improving your plans. For example, now the plan is to play c7, c8, but there is a rook on c8 stopping the pawn from promoting, so we have to get this rook out of there with, for example, knight b6. So this is exactly what Gukesh tries to go for. Knight d7, rook a6, now knight b6. Eventually c7 can look good, but it's hanging now. So we have to go, knight b6, allow rook c7, and try to do something to push that pawn. For example, one day we would like to go bishop f4, and once the rook goes somewhere, we go c7. But the problem is that if we do that thing over here, the knight will be hanging, so after takes, black will have two pieces for a rook, which is not good. So let's go back. Rook c3 was played instead. The idea is pretty simple, just preparing to play rook c1 and slowly but surely making sure that this pawn is overprotected to eventually try something with that knight. For example, knight d7, and then, reorientate the knight towards better squares to just, move the knight, attack with the bishop. But if we move the knight now, the pawn is hanging, so it doesn't work. So rook c3, f6, preparing e5 at some point, rook ac1, knight d6. Now if you go bishop b4, there is normally e5. But I think that black thought that after bishop f4, e5 was an option, but I think black forgot that there is knight d5 attacking the rook, and if rook c8, then there is at the very least check, takes, and if you take the bishop, I take the knight, and if you take the knight, I move the bishop, and I'm up in exchange. So in that position, rook b6, bishop d6, black accepted to trade off just to go rook c8, and now it's more difficult to eventually do something with that rook on c8. What it means is that when you're winning and you have an advantage, you still have to provoke something. The game isn't winning just because you decided the game is winning. Your opponent can still play some moves which will be very aggressive, and that is why you have at some point to play a lot of chess, because when you play a lot of chess, you will get even more and more and more winning positions, and you'll get more experience, you will get just more experience, and you'll be able to convert more positions and more and more and more positions. So bishop b4, it feels like the position slipped from white's hand, and now the position looks equal, but it's not, because white still has a passed pawn which is going to go, which is going to jump on c7, eventually c8 at some point, but white still has to create plans and find ideas to eventually make progresses. It doesn't matter which one, but you have to find one. For example, in that position, probably white can play very slowly with rook c5, rook a4, rook c5, rook a5, rook a4. But yeah, this is eventually what white can go for, but it is a very personal question what you want to go for to win. d4, black is actually playing with some counterplay, and that is why chess is difficult. There are always problems. Rook c5, e5, so now black also has a passed pawn, but we do not care because our pawn is on c6, now on c7, and this pawn can always be stopped. There is no rook d8 defending the pawn and helping the pawn marching forward, and in the worst case, we will go bishop d2, and yeah, okay, now b2 is hanging, but it's just that you know, it has to be that simple in your mind. You cannot calculate everything. You have to see patterns to make progresses. King f7, bring the king closer, but now f4. Gukesh decides to leave the pawn on c7, and Gukesh thought, yeah, I'm winning on the queen side. Now let's just win in the center. You cannot take because I grab your bishop. So rook e6 takes, rook takes, and now we can take, which was played in the game, and now the pawn structure will be pretty much difficult to handle, but probably a better move was something like rook c6. Now the pawn is actually isolated and unprotected, and the idea is that, let's say black wants to make progresses like that, at some point, let's just assume we will just go rook b8 and eventually prepare to take, bishop takes, then put the rook on the other side. It doesn't work yet, but you have to create these plans in your mind. Otherwise, you won't be able to find ideas if you don't force yourself to see, plans. But Gukesh decided to take and go g4, bishop d7, and just bring the king closer. So Gukesh wins this game very, very slowly. He just makes small progresses. Now he will eventually put the king there, grab all the pawns, and that's it. So king e6, rook c5, and e4. Just marching forward with the pawns, but now it's weakening the f4 square. So Gukesh goes on g3 and f4, h6, king f4, e3, and now rook e5. The idea is pretty simple. The pawn is now protected by the bishop and not by the rook anymore, which means that the rook is now free to move, and eventually we will get the pawns. g5, king e4, h5. If you try bishop c6 thinking, oh, I can take, then you can't really take because it's protected by everything, so it doesn't matter, and this rook is paralyzed. So h5, and basically now Gukesh just took all the pawns, and now he's just up 2 pawns, and he decided to promote this pawn actually never. He decided to just, make progresses with the B pawn, and he won that game very, very slowly. So how to game games which are strategically completely winning, win them slowly. Now we will talk about a more tactical type of position. I'm sorry, I leaked. And basically, we will see how to win tactical type of positions. So it's against Doki Jobava. Jobava. And okay, d4, knight f6, knight f3, d5, bishop f4, classical London system. The link is in the link of the book is in the description. E6, E3, bishop D6, and now knight BD2. Gukesh accepts, takes, but to reinforce the control on the E5 square. Now white has two F pawns, which means that when white will actually castle, white will have the pawn on F4 ready for the attack and eventually push F5 one day. But also the control on the e-file is important. And the difference is that when you use your f2 pawn and you go f4, this diagonal is weak. But now there is already a pawn on f4, so the pawn isn't, so the king won't be weak on g1. So castles, bishop d3, c5, and now d takes c5. Gukesh really likes to take on c5 because now it's actually forcing the bishop to move again. The position is slightly more open. But okay, castles, knight c6, and now e4. Yeah, so Gukesh just plays this position very slowly. He decides to just open up the center and play with 3 pawns against 2 on the queen side, and eventually 3 against 4 on the king side. This 3 against 2 is a lot easier to handle than the 4 against 3 because the kings are on the same side, so it's pretty difficult. Takes, and now queen b6, which is a mistake because of the tactical combination that Gukesh went for, which is bishop takes h7. So if you want, you can ask me in the comment section, about this tactical pattern. But basically, the only way it works is when your opponent cannot go knight f6 or put a bishop or queen on this huge and long diagonal. But why? Because after takes, knight g5, king goes, let's say on g8, you can go queen h5, and you will basically go for a checkmate. It was probably still the best option, but you have to trust yourself in these types of position, and that's not really simple. Actually, it's mate, so he shouldn't have tried to go for it. But okay, he played king g6, which is special, but it's actually the best. Usually we go h4 to then threaten h5 check. If the king goes back there are some discover checks, winning the queen on d8. And if you go on f5, some check, and mate, and things like that. But this is not what happened in the game. Gukesh went for queen g4. And black defended pretty well with f5. The idea is just to, move the queen out of the g file. There is no more discover checks because the queen is hanging. So queen g3, and now king f6, accepting, to give this rook back, but just to have 2 pieces for a rook and eventually survive the attack. It's still very difficult, but it's okay. So king f6 and rook fe1. The idea is just to threaten some, some things over there. But I think that this move is slightly inaccurate because I don't know, actually. I felt like it's actually not the case. I'm very sorry about that. I felt like there was bishop f2, sacrificing everything, and e5, but I forgot there was knight h7. But even if you don't play that, you can just go rook e8, and I feel like the position is equalized, and I'm not... Oh, I almost fell down my chair. But basically, I'm not sure really that white is better. I might be wrong, though, because knight f3, and then it's still a positional... I don't want to say an advantage, but there is a positional edge for white. Probably e5 now, and something like that is of course not an option. So I think that was playable. I think that was playable for black, but black missed that. Tactical position, when you miss something, you lost. So bishop d7, and now rook a d1, trusting, because Gukesh of course saw that, but Gukesh basically trusted Doki Jobava to not play bishop f2, and now it's not really the same because the rook is attacking an undefended bishop. Bishop c8, probably bishop b8, e8 only move, but okay, bishop c8, and now rook e2 defending. Rook e8, and now just c3. He takes some time just to make some progresses, grandmaster style, and now he keeps attacking the king, and now the king is basically lost. King h7, and queen h5, threatening mate, check, check, and just grabbing the material. Too many pieces are basically attacking. So, and this is just mate. But basically, the reason why it was difficult to explain more things on a tactical position is because on the tactical position, you either find the tactical patterns or you do not. And when you do not, you might actually be losing, or you will actually make a lot of mistakes. When you're winning strategically, you have to follow your plan while creating new plans all the time. Of course, if you have any more questions, just let me know in the comment section. I'll be more than happy to answer you. Hopefully see you in the future. Subscribe to the channel, share. Thank you again for the 400 subscribers. See you in the future. Take care.